parked up here at Waterstones. Oh yes, it's the Barnes & Noble of good old London. Pretty cool little place. I'm worried that there'll be no bookstores left in the world. I got some pretty good books. Let me show them to you here. What do we know? What do we really know? I bought Rich, the history of the rich. It's actually super interesting. You know, whether or not you want to be rich, I always like to study extremes because it's the best place. If you argue in ad absurdum, that's a logical tool to learn something. This one is by William Morris. Not the William Morris, the marketing guy, the philosopher. This is Nietzsche, a little book called Man Alone with him. So if you're looking for books, man, go straight to the top. Here's a book by Freud called Deviant Love, his thoughts on love, and Seneca on the shortness of life. You really can't get better than that. Now, what I want to talk about today is something a little different here. Let me get where it's not quite so loud, and I'll explain. All right, I got a place a little bit less loud. So, what I want to talk about today is, you know, a lot of you are probably interested in self-help and stuff like that. I'm gonna keep walking here. What's the fundamental of self-help, self-improvement? I think the greatest thought ever thought along those lines, or the greatest concept for you to fathom. Amazingly, I was thinking about this today because it's like, no matter how many years I've been interested in this subject, I still forget. Socrates, know thyself. Now, if you've been reading like some of the Peter Drucker books that I'm talking about, Managing Oneself, what is that book really about? If you wanted to encapsulate it in just one word, it's about knowing yourself. Now, I was at dinner with somebody yesterday, and I was like, how well do you know yourself? And of course, they were like, oh, I know myself perfectly. And I'm like, look, first of all, your brain is completely set up to not be self-aware. So I think that's the fundamental, right? It's like you have to realize that you're not set up to know yourself, right? That's fundamental number one. Why? Well, the neurosis and fear of life, right? What do we fear? We fear death, we fear natural forces, sickness, and lastly, we fear other people. Those are the three fears that you probably have. So we build up neurosis in our brain, and we begin to tell ourselves stories about ourselves that are generally not true. Some of those work towards our favor. Maybe you think you're better at business, you think you're better at sports, you think, and that gives you some level of confidence to get through the hardships of life. So at some level of delusion is functional. But when you go beyond that, and when it goes from functional to dysfunctional, is where it actually keeps you in whatever state you're currently in. So, knowing oneself. Number one is realizing it's not natural. Number two is realizing that you will be somewhat delusional about yourself, and that some of it is okay. The functional parts are okay, but a lot of it is not. Number three, okay, the third one is pretty big here. You got to define specifically what areas. It's not enough to just go with Socrates where he said, know thyself. That's too broad. What part do you have to know about yourself? So Drucker says in Managing Oneself, speaking to business, he says you have to know how you learn. For me, I learn by talking. I'm more of an audio learner. I do not learn by taking notes. Like, I take notes in books, but then I realize, Ty, do you really know yourself? Is there any value? The only value for me for reading and taking notes is somewhat occasionally being able to go back and write. That's about it. So I asked myself, why the heck are you taking notes, Ty? Right? That's born out of me having some expectation from other people. So when you know yourself, you begin to live up to things that fulfill your own desires, right? I want to learn things. I don't care if other people take notes and learn better that way. I don't, so I stop it. So going back to the 4 pillars of life, you got to know 4 things about yourself specifically when you say you know yourself. Number 1, what makes you healthy? For me, I love beef. believe it or not, I feel better the more beef I eat. Assuming I eat grass-fed beef, organic, it's really healthy. But I've tried different things. I tried a fruitarian diet. I did not feel good. I remember my brain just being like zonked out. It's like marijuana, it's controversial. Some people say it's harmless, harmful. Well, I know myself. I've tried it, and it makes me feel stupid. So I know myself now. I don't need to keep experimenting. And when you look at your life, where you've gone wrong is where experiments have turned into mistakes. And a mistake is just an experiment run for too long. So experiment with lots of stuff. I experimented with fruitarian. I experimented with vegetarian. And where I am now seems to work. Now, that's not to say that anecdotal evidence can't be a bad teacher. You definitely can have an experience and the data's flawed. You could try a fruitarian diet, but maybe you ate the wrong fruit. So it's not simple enough to just quickly draw conclusions off one experiment. You got to do it over time. When it comes to reading, I've learned the best thing for me, if I want to read a book, is to talk about it. For you, it might be completely different. For you, it might be taking notes. For you, it might be writing a report. Whatever. For you, it might be an audio book, like I learned from physical books. So audio is somewhat helpful, but I don't like it as much. I don't seem to learn as well. Know thyself. So going back to, I was skipping ahead to education, but because that's what Drucker talked about. But know yourself health-wise. Don't be locked in. Who cares what your culture? If you're Indian, if you're Asian, if you're African, who cares? You don't have to eat African food. It might be bad for you. You don't have to eat Asian food. Find that thing, because as Socrates said, the greatest or the most foundational of all philosophers, know thyself. Number 2, know yourself in business. And this is a long conversation. For those of you who are in some of my, coaching stuff, I talk a lot about this. But again, what's the source of unhappiness for most people? Freud talked about it. You got to get work and love right. So people, if your work isn't right, I can't tell you how often. I would say 80% of the time when I talk to somebody and it's like, what are you good at? What makes you go to bed at night feeling like you did the right thing? Inevitably, that's not what people do for work. I don't know why. You're going to spend most of your life at work. I don't care what you think. You will spend the mass of your life in a pursuit of career, because in the modern world and in all time, since the beginning of time, humans, animals, we've needed scarce resources, and you only get scarce resources if you compete for them. And in the modern world, we call that work, career. You will always be competing for money. So you might as well compete on that thing where you go, yeah, I know myself. For me, I know myself. I tried corporate. I worked at GE Capital, biggest company in the world. I don't like wearing suits. It's as simple as that. I know myself. So now I feel a lot better when I set my own hours, when I can be a little bit of a night owl, when I can take a break when I need to, but I'm also free to pursue as many hours, because I don't mind working. So I like unlimited upside potential. I don't want to be locked in and go, okay, you only work this much, you only got that much money. I'm like, hey, if I work hard, give me my just rewards, So you have to know yourself when it comes to career. Next thing, love, socially. We live in a world, it's like everyone has to get married. No, not everybody has to get married. I do think everyone needs to find love romantically, but that's a rule imposed on people. Question the rules. Know thyself. Not everyone needs to have kids. In fact, part of the problem in the world is people that shouldn't have kids, and people who shouldn't have kids do, and vice versa. And once again, that comes from knowing yourself. Horses for courses. The right race track and the right race horse. The matchup. Right? Mike Murphy used to tell me, Ty, you got to get the right racehorse for the right racetrack. You got a long, slow and steady racetrack. You better get a long, slow-going, slow and steady horse. Which horse are you? Peter Drucker goes through that. What are your values? What are those things? I see on a 1 to 10 scale. You should ask yourself, how materialistic are you? And there's no right or wrong answer. So we need a world with some 10s and some 1s. You should ask yourself, how sensual are you? And I don't mean sensual in like always a sexual way. I'm talking about how important it is for you to live with nice things, whether they be a nice house, nice cars. On a 1 to 10, some people are more sense-oriented than other, and some people, like my grandfather, he was head in the clouds guy. You can go through, more questions. And this, I'm not going to go through this in the whole video, but how many questions can you ask yourself about who you are? You could take the Myers-Briggs test. It's online, human metrics. Find out if I'm an ENTP. Find out what you are. That's continually knowing yourself. There's other personality tests. I've developed one called the PACE system, PASE. You can try that one. I also recommend, when it comes to happiness, that you look at Freudian civilization as discontents. There's 9 areas that he brings up that you can find happiness. Some of us find happiness through love. Some of us find it through beauty, art. Some of us find it through chemicals, alcohol, drinking, drugs. Some people find it through retreat from the self, meaning becoming more like Eastern, like being Buddhist and trying to meditate and remove the senses and the appetites. You must find that thing for you that works for you. And I don't mean to be so individualistic, because I think there's a danger in the modern world that we're totally individualistic. But again, by the way, that brings up something. Know yourself. Everybody I know wants to be an entrepreneur, but I'm like, well, some people should be an employee. What should you be? Not everyone's built to be an entrepreneur, risk taker. Are you meant to be a solo entrepreneur? Or like Bill Gates, he said, I never did anything alone. Are you meant to be in partnership? These are all fundamental questions. I recommend you take a notepad and you begin to write out every little facet. Do you care about fashion or not? Do you care about beauty or not? Do you care about art or not? The answers inevitably are easier than you think to find. The problem is none of us ever got trained, or very few of us, around this Socrates, this Socratic understanding of self. Know yourself. Know the kind of, I was thinking love, romance. Who is the person that's your type? Now people say you shouldn't have a type. Why not? Have a type. That's probably rooted in some kind of evolutionary physical, they find when you're attracted, like you're dark, like me, I'm dark hair, dark eyes. I've often been attracted to lighter skinned women, and they found there's nothing wrong with that. Somebody getting in a car here behind me. There's nothing wrong with that. They've actually found that often scientists that's a complementary immune system. So don't ignore. We've been taught, you shouldn't care about physical. Well, that's a bunch of BS. It's okay to have a physical type you're attracted to. It's probably rooted in some need of your body to round out your genetics if you were to have children. So again, knowing yourself. How do you learn? Do you learn from these YouTube videos? Then watch my YouTube videos. If you don't, some of you like podcasts. Go on my website, listen to the podcast, the audio versions of these. Again, know yourself. And this thought has been beat to death so much, it's so kind of cliche, that unfortunately, what's happened with the cliche is that we've forgotten the tremendous fundamental, rudimentary lesson there. It's oftentimes, if you want people to ignore something, say it all the time. You've probably heard the saying, know yourself. But I guarantee you, if you're like me, you haven't taken it to the nth degree. You haven't examined each and every facet of your personality, each and every facet of your happiness, of your physical body, wealth. Are you a bodybuilder, or are you a sprinter, or are you a jogger? One of the simple tests. And so anyway, that was I think that was number 4. Number 5, the simplest test, because you might be saying, Ty, it's hard for me to figure out. Here's the simple test. When you go to bed after doing that activity, whether it be eating beef or, dating a certain kind of person, or, are you social? Do you like to host? Are you an introvert? You'll know by what makes you feel, you go to bed feeling like you did the right thing. It's that gut feeling. And, I'm a pretty logical guy, so I'm not always big on gut feelings, because so many of our gut feelings can be manipulated by our environment, by our past traumas, by our past experience. But on this one, I'm going to go with the gut. There's certain things I do like sometimes when I host too big of events, I kind of go to bed not feeling right. I feel like, oh, I might have messed up this, or that person, da 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 da. So I've learned about myself, even though I do huge, 500 people at my house, sometimes I got to tone it down. I've learned that about myself. My stomach doesn't feel right. George Soros, one of the great investors of all time, he says that he would go by back pain and tell if he should buy or sell a stock or a position in an investment. So he was using that kind of gut fulfilling feeling. So really go, not just by happiness. It's not always happiness. I like to feel fulfilled. There's some things when I go to bed, I just feel off that I did. You got to do less of those. Okay? So anyway, my thoughts on 4 or 5 thoughts on how to know thyself, the value. And let me just say, the reward for knowing yourself is everything you've ever wanted. It's health, wealth, love, happiness, fulfillment in the moment, memory type happiness, intrinsic momentary happiness, fulfillment, respect of your peers, wealth, feeling good, longevity. All those things start with knowing yourself. So take this as a reminder. I'm sure you've heard it before. A lot of these things are things that I'm reminding myself. Like I said, I'm an audio learner, so these videos aren't just for you. They're also to remind myself of what I've learned from those great thinkers, like those books that I showed you earlier, whether it be Freud or Nietzsche. There's a lot to learn. Be a learner, be curious, and start with the curiosity about yourself, okay? I will talk to you soon. I'm supposed to be leaving London soon, so should be back in sunny California relatively quickly. All right?